There was just too much to cover in my three big stories. My three big stories alone is going to be 12 big stories today, just because there's a lot to cover. And I thought, okay, how serious is Syria? Do you think that this is important? So I put this out as a poll. Do you think it's important to understand what's happening in Syria? Because that was like half of my coverage, and 93% of you said yes. So here we are with this video on Syria. Now, losing Syria is going to be terrible for Vladimir Putin. You have two sides, and this comes from Ryan Macbeth, who put this together, and I appreciate him for doing that. The pro-Assad side, so you have the Syrian forces, and then you have Russian forces, and then you have Iranians backing Syria and training Hezbollah in Syria, and Hezbollah, who needs Syria to train in, and weirdly Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, then on the other side of the equation, the anti-Assad forces, you have HTS, that's the Islamic militia that is currently making gains beyond Aleppo. They're now well down below Aleppo. And then you have Haras al-Din, that's an Al-Qaeda affiliated group that fights with ISIS. I know it sounds ridiculous because it sounds like these two should be getting along, but they're really not. Then you have the Syrian Democratic Forces. These are the Kurdish fighters that are fighting both ISIS and Assad, and to some degree the Turks, and they're backed by the US. And then you have the People's Protection Unit, which is a subdivision of the Kurds. And then you have the Free Syrian Army, which is a loose confederation of just rebels that were partly Assad loyalists that now have converted over. And then you have the Syrian National Army, which is Turkish-backed forces that are mainly fighting the SDF, that's the Syrian Democratic Forces. So they can't all get on the same page, but they all agree that Assad's a bad guy and he has to go. Okay, with that being said, after HTS-led rebel forces took control over Hama, and this was just a day or two ago, they moved south and have been spotted in Al-Dar al-Kabria, just 5 kilometers to Homs city center. It's going fast, and the Syrian army is collapsing, and so it really does look like the Syrian army is losing a lot of ground. Syrian rebels, that's the HTS, have almost reached Homs city, and they are repeating the Hama takeover by launching a flanking operation against this major Syrian city. So they're coming at it from both sides simultaneously. Okay. We're getting closer to a warm water port. So let's look at a map of Syria. Here's Aleppo in the northwest of the country. And if you go down the M5 highway, you eventually get to Hama, and they just took Hama, and then you get to Homs. And if you keep going, you get all the way down to Damascus. And I think they'll keep going. If you turn between Hama and Homs and you go out to the Mediterranean, you're at Tartus. Tartus is where the Russian naval port is, and that's very, very important for Russia's ability to project force into the Mediterranean. This is Daria, the south of Syria. Open rebellion is effectively starting. These guys are on their way to go to a fight. Now, where is that? If you keep going down this M5 highway, you're going to get to the bottom of Syria and this Dara down here. So after Damascus, that's where this is in the south below Damascus. That's what you're seeing here. Okay, now let's talk about the geography of what's going on in Syria. In the upper northeast corner of Syria, it's controlled by Kurds. Kurds are US-backed. They're about as good as the good guys get in Syria. And then you see in the top of Syria, going across the top of Syria on the border of Turkey, you see Turkish-backed rebels, and they sometimes fight with the Kurds. And then in the northwest, you see the rebels that are now streaming down through the M5 highway down toward Damascus, and those are the ones that are really doing the significant damage here. Now, there's a Russian Z blogger, his name is Fighter Bomber, and he is not a great guy in and of himself, but he tries to show something more truthful than not, generally speaking. He's pro-Russia, so he's not talking Russian propaganda points, but he wants them to win. He's a Z patriot. Russian Z blogger Fighter Bomber says that the situation in Syria is catastrophic. This is according to Anton Gerashenko, who's posted this. According to him, Russian military bases and airfield are virtually unprotected from shelling. There is nowhere to withdraw from them, and evacuation is completely impossible. He says they probably will come under artillery and drone strikes in the near future. In his Telegram channel, Z-Blogger wrote the following, quote, "It is difficult to make any predictions of the situation in Syria, but we can state that the situation has become about the same as in 2015, except for one factor." Now, if you watch me for any period of time, you know probably what that one factor is, because I am just enamored by looking at this one major factor in the war in Ukraine. The factor is the emergence of drones. Drones, which no one anywhere has learned how to reliably fight against. All other weapons of the Islamists do not much differ in quality and quantity from what they had in 2015. The people are still the same. How does this difference threaten us? It threatens us with the loss of airstrike component, which accounts for 75% of the combat capabilities of our troops, and he's talking about Russian troops, our troops in the SAR. The air base is not a multi-story promo project with basements. It is a field with lightly assembled houses on top, which will cease to function as soon as the enemy comes within artillery range or drone flight range. And then it will not be possible to use the maneuver of aviation, which saves us on the mainland. There's nowhere to withdraw. In fact, the only reserve airfields left in Syria are 2 airfields. This is a critical minimum. The situation with the naval base in Tartus is about the same. Of course, it can be defended and held for quite a long time if there is someone and something to do, but it will either not be able to function at all or very limitedly. It's almost impossible to evacuate the bases. As best you can evacuate most of the personnel, documentation, transfer serviceable aircraft, some of the equipment which is on the move can be placed on dry cargo ships and landing ships, but of course not all. All other equipment will remain on the bases until it's snatched by the rebels. Resistance to drones is also limited to distance from the mainland with its supply of missiles and missile systems. But if it comes to FPV drones, well, things can change, right? Therefore, the main task of our forces in Syria is to prevent the enemy from entering Latakia. Even if we have to temporarily give up the rest of the territory, it's clear what and how to do in theory, but we'll see how it will look in practice. So he's not happy about the situation, and that's a really good sign for the rebels and a really bad sign for the Assad regime. Russia is moving helicopters from Homs to Damascus. Russian Telegram channel reports. They also allege that the Syrian army has concluded a mutual defense pact with the Kurdish forces. That sounds very strange that they would do that. I don't think the Kurds would be interested in that, but that could just be propaganda. Okay, Turkish President Erdogan said, quote, "We made a call to Assad saying, 'Come, let's determine the future of Syria together.' Unfortunately, we did not receive a positive response to this." Well, Assad doesn't want to call him back and talk about how he's going to be deposed and what he's going to have to do to evacuate. So that was probably a non-starter. Now, UATV in English reported this: the loss of military bases in Syria in the event of overthrow of the Bashar al-Assad regime would deprive Vladimir Putin of the ability to influence the situation in the Mediterranean. That's right, because the Tartus naval base is the only Russian warm water port, and it's in the Mediterranean on Syrian soil. And when that goes, Russia's force projection ability will be actually curtailed in a significant way that it wasn't before. So Putin will lose some of his ability to project force, and Putin doesn't want that, but that's not going to be within his control. If they don't move soon, they risk losing both troops and resources they can't afford to replace. Tartus is non-negotiable for the regime. It's home to the Russian naval base. The only reason that Assad is still in power, because Russia's naval base gives Assad extra power to harass and kill his own people, as he's been doing for many, many years. Jason J. Smart posted this: the Russian embassy in Syria has called Russians to leave the country on flights through operating airports due to the worsening situation. So Russians, get out of the country. The Russian Navy already left their Syrian base, and Russian army has abandoned position too. Like we saw the ships leaving from Tartus. The end of Assad, like Putin, nears. Well, the end of Assad for sure. The end of Putin, well, that's yet to be determined. But we have statues of Assad's family members coming down. Here's Kyiv Insider. We always said that the Putin regime was the dead cat bounce within the trajectory of the collapsing USSR, but didn't know which of Russia's colonies would be the first to drop. Well, it looks like Syria is that colony that's the first to drop. And colony is not too strong of a word. It's part of the influence sphere of the Ruski Mir, which is starting to contract here in Syria. Here's a motorcyclist with a chain to the head of that statue driving around. Now, meanwhile, Iran is accusing Ukraine of supporting Syrian rebels and selling illegal American weapons, not offering any real evidence of that. Iranian Foreign Ministry characterized these alleged actions as a clear violation of international commitments regarding counterterrorism efforts. Well, but that's of course coming from Iran, who's known for supplying drones and missiles to help Russia wage its war against Ukraine, let alone training Hezbollah in Syria. So You can probably safely discount that. But the real thing that you want to focus on is the jubilance of the people of Syria as they are losing the dictator. Apparently, it looks like they're going to lose the dictator who has been plaguing them, because when Assad goes after his enemies, he doesn't make a distinction if there are civilians in the area. He'll just barrel bomb them just as well, and they know it. So that's where we are with the situation in Syria right now. I hope that helps and answers questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.